In this video we'll be installing and configuring our delivery controller. Once our delivery controller is installed, we'll be creating our Virtual Apps and Desktops 1912 site. Once the site is fully installed and configured using our empty databases we created on our SQL Always On availability groups, we'll then add a second delivery controller for high availability to the site. We'll also then go through some post-installation checks and tasks that I typically like to perform. We'll then go through and talk about the Citrix localhost cache, what it is, what it does. We'll then basically talk about securing our delivery controllers, the XML service on our delivery controllers. So when we add our delivery controllers to our Storefront server on the store, it will communicate with the delivery controller over the XML port. So we want to secure that XML traffic with a certificate. So we'll set up and install our certificates on our delivery controllers. We'll also create a load balancing virtual server VIP on our Netscaler for our delivery controllers, and then we'll create a DNSA record that points to that load balancing VIP, and then we'll be using that going forward on our Storefront store. We'll be pointing directly at that VIP for our XML service. So let's begin. So I've mounted my Virtual Apps and Desktops media, my 1912 media. So if we now go to our D drive, we've now got the installation media here. I just want to talk about some prereqs before we kick off the installation. As part of the installation, it will install .NET Framework, C++, as well as PowerShell. From a hardware point of view, it's very important to spec your delivery controller right. So there was tests done by Citrix, and a delivery controller with 4 vCPUs and 4 GB of memory could support 5,000 VDAs. That's changed now a little bit with the localhost cache, because it is quite resource intensive from a CPU point of view. So the recommendation, I typically set my delivery controllers to 4 vCPUs and 8 GB of memory or 12 GB of memory. But yeah, you can typically scale them out if you've got more than 5,000 VDAs. What I tend to do is, you've always got to have multiple delivery controllers for high availability. If you only have a single delivery controller and it goes down, all the brokering and enumeration and authentication will fail. So it's very important to have a highly available delivery controller set up. So that's a little bit of info about speccing the delivery controller. So let's now kick on with the installation. So we're going to double click our auto select on our installation media. Under Virtual Apps and Desktops, once it loads, we're going to click on Start, and then we're going to install the delivery controller role. We're going to accept the licensing terms. And then under the core components, this is if you've got a single server and you want to combine multiple roles on a single server. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless it's a very small environment. Typically for an enterprise environment, you would separate these out into individual servers, which we're going to do. So you can see here we're going to install just 2 roles. We're going to install the delivery controller role, and we're going to install Citrix Studio. We're going to have separate Citrix Director servers. We've already got a separate Citrix license server, and we're going to have separate Storefront servers. So we're just going to install these 2 components, the delivery controller role and Citrix Studio, which we'll use to configure and manage our site. So we'll click on Next. You can install SQL Server 2017 Express Edition if you don't have any SQL servers using SQL mirroring or always on availability groups, or if you don't have a SQL cluster and you've got no SQL licenses, you can use the free edition of SQL Server Express. but I wouldn't recommend it for enterprise environments. So we've got our own SQL Server instances running always on availability groups, so we're not going to select this option. There is one important fact: when you install this, it will actually install a local SQL Server Express instance, which is to be used for the local host cache, but this is for the site setup. We're not going to install SQL Server 2017 Express Edition. So I'm going to click next on here. So you can see here it's moaning about the recommendation of the RAM. Because this is my lab, I'm a bit limited on resources. I've only gave my delivery controller 4 gig of memory. As I say, in production you would have either 8 gig or 12 gig of memory for your delivery controller. It shouldn't cause any issues as this is just a lab. These are the ports that need to be open. So the VDAs will communicate with your delivery controller over port 80 or 443 if you're using certificates on your VDAs. The Storefront servers will communicate with your delivery controllers again over either port 80 or 443, and then the delivery controller communicates with your license server over the license server ports I mentioned in the previous video. So that's 27,000, 7279, 8082 and 8083. So make sure they're open between the delivery controller and the license server. We're going to click next on here to configure the Windows firewall rules automatically. You can see here these are the prereqs that I mentioned: C++, .NET Framework. We're only going to install 2 components, Delivery Controller and Studio. These are the ports. We're now going to click on Install. What I'll do is, this is quite a lengthy process and it will also require a couple of reboots. I'm going to pause the video, and then once the installation is finished I'll resume the video. So our delivery controller installation, this is now finished. We're at this stage now where it's asking us to collect diagnostics information and upload to Citrix Insight services. We're not going to tick that because we'll have to log in with our Citrix Cloud account. So we're not going to do this in this lab. So I'm just going to click on next here. And now all the prereqs have been met, so you can see .NET Framework, C++, the core components, Delivery Controller and Studio have been installed. So now there is a couple of prereqs that I want to mention before we get into the site creation within Citrix Studio. There is SQL permissions required to be able to create the database, create schemas, update schemas, add a controller, remove a controller. Those SQL permissions are: you need to be a DB creator. You also need to be a security admin, and you actually need DB owner permissions as well. What I tend to do is I tend to give myself sysadmins, add myself to the sysadmin role within SQL. So I'll show you how to do that, just in case if you're struggling and your DBAs can't help you. So if you come onto your SQL server, so we're going to log in here to node 1. I'm just going to log in. If we expand logins under our SQL nodes, so you can see here under logins, what you can do is you can just create a new login here, and then under user mapping you map that basically under server roles, sorry, you map that then to the sysadmin role. So you can see here we've got a group that we added during the installation of SQL, SQL_admins. If I do properties on that and then go to server roles, you can see this has the sysadmin role. So when you sysadmin, you're a DB owner on all databases. So I'm a member of that SQL_admins group, so my permissions are good. Let's just double check that actually, just to make sure. I'm pretty certain I am. So if we do a search for SQL_admins, I'm just going to open this up now, go into members. Yeah, so you can see the administrator account which I'm using is a member of the SQL admins. SQL admins are then sysadmin role on the SQL instances. So our permissions are fine, so we're now ready to install. You can also generate, if you can't get sysadmin permissions, you can generate some SQL setup scripts which you can send to your DBAs. They need to run that with SQL CMD mode enabled. There's some PowerShell scripts as well, where you have to enable and disable services, and then there's some .SQL scripts that you give to the DBAs. As long as they run that with SQL CMD, that will work as well. So let's just click on Finish. We'll launch Citrix Studio and we'll get into our site creation. Okay, we'll just wait for Citrix Studio to open. Okay, so we haven't actually got anything yet because we've obviously not created our site and populated our databases. So we need to basically click on this here under Site Setup, deliver apps and desktops to your users. So we'll click on that. And you have two options here. You have a fully configured production ready site. So this is where you set up all your hosting connection to your hosting platform. That could be Hyper-V and System Center Virtual Machine Manager. That could be vCenter for ESX, or it could be Zen Server if you're using the Citrix Zen Server hypervisor. It could also be Nutanix as well. Also, you can hook it up now into Azure ARM and also Amazon as well. So we're going to be using a vCenter in this lab, but I haven't actually got it installed and configured yet. So at this stage, what we're going to do is we're just going to create an empty unconfigured site, and then we'll set up our hosting connection a little bit later in a future video. So you can see here, we're going to give our site a name. So I'm just going to call this lon-xd site. So this is typically the name you give. What a lot of companies do is they have regional Zen desktop sites. Again, that's just specific to the company. You don't have to name it that. You can name it whatever you want. But in my example, I'm just going to call it lon. We'll get rid of the dash actually. Lon XD site. We'll click on next. And now this is where we basically have to connect it to our SQL instance. So because we're using always on availability groups, we need to use our always on availability group listener here. And then we need to basically specify the names of the databases that we created in the previous video. So I'm just going to remove these. I'm just going to log on and just check the name of the databases. So if we go to node 1, and then if we expand databases, so we've got Citrix Log AO, Citrix Mon AO, and Citrix Site AO. So let's just type them in. So Citrix Site AO, monitoring Citrix Mon AO, and then it will be Citrix Log AO. So I'm just going to confirm that, just make sure that's correct. Citrix Mon AO, Citrix Log AO, Citrix Site AO. So yep, that's correct. We're ready now to specify our listener. So our always on availability group listener is, if we come under here, and then if we expand our always on availability group, you can see this is our listener here. So Citrix AO AG 1912 is our availability group listener for this availability group. So this is what we need to specify during the setup. So let's just copy the Citrix AO AG 1912. So Citrix always on, let me just double check that, AOAG 1912, and then I'm just going to copy and paste that availability group listener for all the databases. This is where you would generate the SQL setup scripts if you didn't have the SQL permissions. So you can just tick this option here. As I've got sysadmin, we're going to set up the databases from Citrix Studio. So I've specified the databases names. They're the empty databases within our availability group. This is our always on availability group listener. So we're pretty much ready to go now. So we'll click on next. It will validate the database details. So it will check the permissions. It will check to see if the databases are there, which they are. That's all good. And as you can see, that's passed, so there's been no issues. Our SQL permissions are good. So I'm going to click on now our Citrix license server. I'm going to enter that details in. So our Citrix license server is lon-ctx-lic01. We've actually got a license file, so once we connect, so because we haven't got a certificate yet on our Citrix license server, it's asking us to say it doesn't trust the certificate because there's not a certificate on there and it's untrusted. So we'll click connect me, I trust this server, and then what it should do now is it should list all our licenses. So in this lab we'll be using Virtual Apps and Desktops Premium user device licenses. So you can see it's listed all our license files which are installed on our Citrix license server. We'll click next on here. We'll then click on finish. And now it will start creating the database schemas, populating all the tables. So we'll just wait for this to finish. What I'll do is I'll pause the video, and once that's finished, I'll resume the video. The installation of our delivery controller and the setup of our virtual apps and desktop site is now complete. You can see our Studio console is now open, showing us the various different nodes. If we come over to our SQL server and log in, we can actually come under here and look under our databases and look under tables. You can see all the tables have been created for the login database. If we look at the site database again, you can see all the tables have been created, and then it's the same for the monitoring database as well. While we're in SQL, I just want to talk about a little bit about the SQL permissions because it can be confusing, especially if you're coming from the old IMA days with XenApp. So in the old XenApp days, you used to have a Citrix data store, and on that Citrix data store you would assign a service account, the DB owner permissions, and then you would use the dsmaint config and the mf20 DSN file, and you would connect to the data store using that service account, using that DSN file. Since FMA's come out, that's completely changed. The structure of the SQL database has completely changed. I'll show you this diagram and we'll go through and talk a little bit about this. So you can see here we've got three different databases. Now we've got the monitoring database, the configuration login database, and the site database. On our delivery controller we have FMA services. There was 12 or 13 the last time I checked, but they keep increasing these, and those FMA services connect to the SQL databases using DB connection strings. So you can see here for all our three databases, they're all connected to the site database, and then some of the FMA services are also connected to secondary databases. So you can see the monitoring service is also connected to the monitoring database, and the configuration login service is also connected to the configuration login database. If we bring up regedit, I'll show you where the DB connection strings are stored. So if we go under HKey local machine software Citrix and then come under XD services, you can see here these are our FMA services, and if we expand that, go into data store and then connections, you can see here this is the database connection string for that FMA service. So you can see here we've got the analytics one as well, exactly the same. Again, there's a DB connection string. So that's how the FMA services connect to the SQL databases. They do that through their own SQL login. So each delivery controller that you add to the site, an associated SQL login will be created. So if we come over to our SQL server, and then if we go under SQL logins, so let's just show you that now, you can see here we've got a carmo/lon ctx ddc01 with a $, which is a computer account. So you can see here as part of the setup and installation, it's created a SQL login for this delivery controller. If we check the properties of this delivery controller under SQL logins and then go into user mapping, we can see this SQL login is mapped to all our Citrix databases. So you can see here the Citrix log AO database, and there's database role memberships that's configured as part of the setup, and those are assigned to this SQL login. So you can see here config login schema role and the public role, and this is mapped to that Citrix login database. If we look at the monitoring database, there's another database role here for the monitoring database underscore role, and also public. For our site database, there's obviously more FMA services there, because obviously all the FMA services connect to the site database. You can see here the database roles, and there's more down here. So that's how it works. They're the runtime permissions. You don't have to worry about that. It's all done as part of the setup, and those database runtime permissions are automatically set up. There is one thing that we're going to have to do. So if I bring up PowerShell and bring up ISE, and then if we add our Citrix PowerShell snapping, so add-ps snapping, and then do Citrix, and then start, press enter. I've got a command here that I need to run, and I'll show you basically what this will do. What this command will do is it will get all our DB connection strings for all our FMA services, and it will show us all of them. So I'm just going to paste that into here. We'll run that, and now what you can actually see is for all of those FMA services, you can now see all the DB connection strings. This is exactly what we see in the registry, but it's a lot easier just to do it through here through PowerShell. One of the things we'll need to do, because we're using always on availability groups, we need to add the multi-subnet failover string into our DB connection string. There is some PowerShell scripts that Citrix provide which will allow us to do this. It's recommended to do this when you're using always on availability groups. It just improves the failover, especially if you've got like a multi-subnet cluster for always on availability groups. So we'll be doing that a little bit later, but I thought I would just talk about those permissions because it can be confusing, especially if you're coming from the IMA days. So what we'll do now is we'll go into Citrix Studio, and I'll just quickly touch on each node within Citrix Studio, and then after that we'll talk about the localhost cache, and then we'll set up and configure some certificates on our delivery controllers, and then we'll set up a load balancing virtual server and VIP for our XML service, which we'll be using for our Storefront servers to connect to our delivery controllers. So machine catalogs. So this is where we'll be creating our desktop and server OS machine catalogs. We'll be using a mix of provision technologies, so MCS, PVS. So once we've got our hosting connection set up, we'll start creating our machine catalogs. At the time being, we've got no machine catalogs, so there's nothing there. App disks has been deprecated and been replaced by app layering. So with app layering, you have different layers, such as an OS layer, platform layer, an application layer, and a user layer. So app disks is now a deprecated technology. I'm not sure why it's not being removed from the Studio console, but yeah, it's deprecated. Delivery groups, we'll be adding machines into delivery groups from our machine catalogs, and we'll be assigning permissions to our delivery groups. We can then publish applications to our delivery groups and publish desktops and assign permissions to those apps and desktops. We'll be doing that a little bit later once we get our catalogs created. Under applications, this is where all our folders for all our applications are stored, so you can organize your applications. We can also publish and change all the parameters of our applications and assign permissions to our applications from this node. We can also set up and configure application groups. Application groups are recommended to be used now rather than publishing applications to delivery groups. So we'll be setting up and configuring application groups as well as tags, etc. So we'll be doing that a bit later. If we now move down to our policies node, so with policies you can either create them within the Citrix site database through the Studio console, or you can actually create them in Active Directory using group policy. So if you're going to use Active Directory Group Policy, you need to install the Citrix Group Policy extensions on a machine with the GPMC, and then when you create a new GPO, then you'll see the Citrix node where you can actually configure your Citrix policies. Typically you would do them within Citrix Studio if you haven't got permissions within Active Directory and Group Policy, so you haven't got the ability to create, edit, link, unlink GPOs. You would typically do them within the Citrix Studio console, and then they would be stored in the site database. I recommend only doing them in one place because you can have conflicts, and it can cause some pretty complex issues if you're setting the same settings with a policy within Studio, and then you're setting the same policy within AD through a GPO. There is a precedence order, and typically Active Directory policies will win over policies within Studio, so it can kind of cause you some issues if you expect a setting to be set, but you've obviously got the same policy set elsewhere within a GPO. So it's recommended, as I say, just to set it in one place. If you haven't got permissions within AD, set it within Studio. I typically tend to use Studio. It's nice and simple. Keep it within Studio. So yeah. So the next node down is the login node. This is where our configuration login is stored. So anytime we make changes to the site, so for example, add and delete machines to a catalog, delivery groups, put machines into maintenance mode, make any changes to our applications or policies, these will all be stored within the configuration login database. If you work for a bank or another high security institute, you can actually prevent changes to the site when the login database isn't available. Some high security places could require this, so everything is logged. You just got to be careful with this though, because if the configuration login database becomes unavailable, you can't actually manage the site. Next node down, we move into our configuration. So under administrators, this is everyone who can manage the site. So by default, because I installed the site using my administrator account, which is a domain account, I'm automatically made the full administrator, and that applies to everything within the site, the scope. What I like to do is I like to create a new administrator, just in case if the person who set up the site leaves the company or his account gets disabled or deleted, then you'll be locked out of the site. So if I recommend doing this. So we've got a group called Citrix Admins. So if we do a search for Citrix Admins, what I'll do is I'll apply it to the all scope, which is everything in the site, and then there's some built-in roles. We've got a delivery group administrator, full administrator, help desk administrator, host administrator, machine catalog administrator, and a read-only administrator. For our Citrix admins, they'll be doing everything. They'll be setting up and configuring the site, setting up machine catalogs, delivery groups, policies, hosting connections. So we'll give them the full administrator role. We'll click on next. We'll enable the administrator, and then we'll click on finish. So what we've got now is we've got an AD group here, Citrix_admins, and they're assigned, any members of that group are going to be a full administrator and can manage the site through Studio. I typically create another one as well, so I'll create one for my help desk admins. So I've got, let me go over to AD just to make sure I've got the group created. So we'll go into my domain controller, we'll go into my groups OU, and we'll create a new group. So if we call the group helpdesk_admins, click on OK, and then if we go back into Citrix Studio, if we do a search for that group, helpdesk_admins, again, we'll give them the all, so it applies to everything in the site. You can create custom scopes, and then you can filter by the scope. So the scope is typically the machine catalogs, the delivery groups, and the hosting connection. So you can set a limited scope, so it will only apply to certain delivery groups, certain machine catalogs, or certain hosting connections. The all scope applies to everything, so that's fine. We're going to give them the help desk administrator role. So we'll click next, we'll enable the administrator, And then what I like to do is I also like to give them an additional role. So if we come in here, and then we'll give them the read-only administrator role as well. So it means they've got two roles, the help desk administrator role and the read-only administrator role. What these roles will do, it will give them the ability to log into Citrix Director, do a search for sessions. They'll be able to send users messages, interact with their session, so end processes. They'll be able to reset profiles. They'll be able to do shadowing through the remote assistance. So it's recommended to do that. We've delegated control. So our Citrix admins are full admins to the site, and then we've got delegated permissions just to our help desk admins. If we click on controllers, this lists our delivery controllers. So we've only got the one at the moment. In a little while, we'll be setting up and installing our second delivery controller and adding it to the site for high availability. So we'll just skip now down to hosting. So hosting is where we set up our hosting connection to our hosting platform. Our hosting platform will be our hypervisor management solution. So if it's Hyper-V, it will be System Center Virtual Machine Manager. If it's ESXi, it will be vCenter. If it's Zen Server, it will just actually be Zen Server. You can also use Nutanix, Acropolis. You can connect a hosting connection to the public cloud, so Azure ARM, and also to Amazon as well, AWS. So we'll be setting up a hosting connection a little while. I haven't actually set up my ESXi hosts and my vCenter yet, so we'll do that a little bit later, and then we'll come back in here and set up the hosting connection to our vCenter. I'll also show you how to set up a hosting connection to Azure. I've got an Azure subscription, so we'll connect our Citrix Studio hosting connection to Azure as well. Under licensing, you can see our connection to our license server. This will use the Citrix web licensing service to connect to our license server. It will display all our licenses, our overdraft limit. It will show us our subscription advantage dates. It will also allow you to add Citrix licensing administrators through this console. So this is what we did previously within the Citrix Licensing Manager and the Citrix Licensing Administration console. You can actually do it directly here through Studio. One of the things you've got to check is the product edition and the licensing model. These have to be correct based off your edition you've purchased and also the licenses you've got. So if you've got Virtual Apps and Desktops Standard, you can't just, for example, come here and set that to premium. It has to match the edition that you've actually purchased. Same with the licensing model. If you've only got user and device licenses, you can't set that to concurrent licensing. So make sure that matches or you'll get licensing issues. If we come down to Storefront, what this does is it allows us to define our Storefront server, and then on our delivery groups you can add that Storefront server, and the Citrix receivers or the workspace apps within the VDAs within that delivery group will then use that Storefront server to connect to their apps and desktops. Don't use it very often. If we move down to our app-v publishing node, this is where we can add our app-v management server and our app-v publishing server. What we can do with this, we can integrate our app-v applications within Citrix Studio and publish them to our delivery groups with this integration into app-v. We're not going to be using app-v in this lab, so we'll just skip this section. AppDNA is used for application compatibility testing. So what you can do is you can import your MSI packages, your app-v packages, and then you can run them through AppDNA, and it will spit out a reg report which will show you if there's any compatibility issues with the application on that operating system. It can also do a capture install where it can actually deploy the software installation package to a capture VM, and then it can document and give a list of any issues it finds during the installation. So it's a pretty good product. We're not going to be using it in this lab, so again we'll skip that. Zones. So zones came back in I think around 7.7. Zones are good if you've got multiple regions and multiple data centers in different locations, so dispersed data centers. What you can basically do is you can create satellite zones, and then you can add delivery controllers and associate them with them satellite zones. You can also associate your hosting connection with that satellite zone, as well as your machine catalogs. All the VDAs within that machine catalog will register with the delivery controller in the satellite zone. If it can't register with the delivery controller within the satellite zone, then it will fail over and register with the delivery controller in the primary site. The delivery controllers within the satellite zone, they communicate with the SQL database within the primary site. Within the primary site, we always have things like Studio, Director, our license server, our delivery controllers, and the SQL databases. The satellite zones typically just contain, as I say, the delivery controllers, the machine catalogs, and the hosting connection. You can also associate Storefront servers and Netscaler gateways with the satellite zones as well. Once you've got your zone set up, you can actually use zone preference, where you can set application home zones and user home zones, and then set preferred zones for launches. So that works pretty good. Because we've not got a dispersed data center and data centers in different regions, we won't be using zones. Zones are used quite a lot nowadays. Back in the days, you used to build separate sites in each data center with their own SQL infrastructure, but zones have definitely improved now. When you use Citrix Cloud with Citrix hosting all the control layer, when you install your cloud connectors in your resource locations, that is pretty much using zones. So they're very good. They've come on quite a lot. A lot of the requirements around latency and bandwidth and the number of connection launches per sec and stuff has definitely improved. So I'd probably recommend using zones now if you've got multiple data centers. Definitely over now creating multiple sites. It just saves on SQL licenses and having SQL infrastructure in each data center. So I just want to now talk about the local host cache. So the local host cache has come back in. Previously we used to use connection leasing, but the local host cache is now back. You might know the local host cache from the XenApp days, the IMA days. It is completely different. So when we installed the delivery controller, it did install a local copy of SQL Server Express, and it did create a database for our local host cache. I'll show you this article here, which explains how it works. So if we go down to this diagram here, you can see under normal operations on our Storefront store, we add our delivery controllers, and then Storefront communicates with those delivery controllers using the XML service. Our VDAs, the broker agent, also registers with the delivery controller using the broker service, which is the principal broker. And then with the local host cache now, what we've basically got, we've got a new service called the config synchronizer service, which syncs all the data from the principal broker service into a new service, which is the high availability service, and then that syncs all the information into the local host cache database, the SQL Express database. So there is a couple of event IDs. I'll show you these now just to keep an eye on. So this is the one that we want to see, the 504. This means that the broker configuration was copied from that principal broker service. It was then exported using that config synchronizer service, and then imported successfully to that secondary broker service, the high availability service, and then down to the SQL Express database. You can sometimes get this error message here, this event ID here, the event ID 505. That basically means that the import to the local SQL Express database failed. I've seen quite a lot of reasons why that can fail. A lot of the times it's due to SIDs being assigned to delivery groups, published apps, published desktops. Someone's left the company and the AD account's been deleted, which then leaves the SID within Citrix Studio. So that can cause a lot of issues with the local host cache import. So just check the event logs for that. What happens with the high availability service is there's an election process, and one of the delivery controllers is elected to become the primary secondary broker, and then that will take over brokering operations if the primary broker services lose connection to the SQL database. So this is the location of where the localhost cache database is stored. If we go to C and then Windows and then Service Profiles, this directory here, click under Network Service. This is our localhost cache. The MDF is the database, the LDF is the log file. So these are localhost cache SQL Express databases. You can enable CSS tracing. I have had to do this in the past when the import to the localhost cache is failing. So this registry key here enables CSS trace mode, and with CSS trace mode enabled, when the import fails, you can then come and check this HTML file, which gives you information and can show you a reason why the import to the localhost cache failed. The only limitation really with the localhost cache, with connection leasing, you could only launch apps and desktops that you launched within the last 2 weeks. You don't get that limitation with the localhost cache. The only limitation, like connection leasing, is to do with pooled desktops. You can't use pooled VDI desktops when you're in localhost cache mode, unless you change some of the shutdown after use PowerShell parameters. There's shutdown after use in outage mode PowerShell commandlet, and that can prevent all your VDIs, your pooled VDIs, from being shut down. So typically when you use pooled VDIs, when a user logs off, that machine is then shut down, and then all the changes are destroyed, and then the power management will power on a number of machines that's needed depending on your power management settings. So you can tweak some of those settings, but generally pooled desktops don't really work with localhost cache mode, so just be wary of that. You won't be able to manage the site with Studio or PowerShell if you're in localhost cache mode. So it's still important to have a HA SQL solution, which is why we set up and configured a 2-node cluster and SQL always on availability group. So you always got to make sure SQL's highly available. So that's it. That's the localhost cache. What we'll do now is we'll set up our certificate. So we're going to be securing our XML traffic on our delivery controllers. So when we connect Storefront to our delivery controllers, it will use the XML service. So we want to secure that communication because you've got credentials that could go in clear text. Once a user's authenticated through Storefront, those credentials are passed through using the XML service. So we want to make sure that those credentials are basically encrypted. So we will encrypt that communication from Storefront to the delivery controller on the XML service. So to do that, what we're going to do is, if we jump over to my domain controller, I'll show you some of the prereq stuff that I've already done. If we go into my CA console, what I've basically done is I've created a new certificate template. So this is a duplicate of the inbuilt computer template, and what I've done is I've changed some properties of that. So if we right click and do manage on certificate templates, what I did is on the computer certificate template, this one here, I duplicated this template and then I renamed it. So I'll just do it again just so I can show you. So DDC computer 1, I've already got one called DDC computer, so I don't want to have a conflict here. So that's it. I renamed the certificate. Under the request handling, I allowed the private key to be exported because obviously we'll need to install this certificate on our other delivery controller. So I made sure the private key was exportable. And then under subject name, what I did is I changed this to supply and request, because we'll be creating a SAN certificate, because we will be load balancing our XML service on our delivery controllers. we need to be able to provide all the subject alternative names in the enrollment process. So I changed that to supply in the request, and then one of the other things I did here is come into the enrollment in the security permissions, and then I allowed the delivery controller to be able to enroll for that certificate. So this is the actual one I created, this one here, DDC computer template. So I can show you those things. So there's the name. If we come under request handling, you can see the private key is allowed to be exported. If we come under subject name, supplying the request rather than building this automatically through AD. And then under the security tab, I've got my delivery controller with the read and the enroll permissions. So if we go onto our delivery controller now, and then if we bring up the MMC console, and then if we do file, add, remove, snapping, click on certificates, computer account, next, finish, click on OK. We've now got our certificates templates open here on our local computer, and we can see all our certificate stores. Under the personal store, if we do all tasks and then request new certificate, we'll use our Active Directory enrollment policy because we've got our enterprise CA. So if we click next on here, you can see now we can see that new certificate template that we created, the DDC computer template, and it's asking us for more information before we enroll for this certificate. So I'm going to select it, I'm going to click on there, and then I'm going to basically come in here and fill out the information that we need. So we need to change that to common name. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a DNSA record called Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com, and that's going to resolve to the VIP address that we're going to use on our Netscaler, which is going to load balance our delivery controllers and the XML service. So I'll show you how to do this. So under value here, we'll have Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com. We'll click on add, and then under alternative name, this is the subject alternative name. So again, we'll click on DNS. We'll have Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com. We'll click on add, and then we'll add 2 additional DNS names. So we can't use that load balancing VIP for our STAs. The STAs have to point to each individual delivery controller for the STA ID. We can't point at our load balancing VIP for our delivery controllers. So this Citrix XML VIP address, that's what we'll use in Storefront on the Storefront stores for our delivery controller. But for our STAs on the Netscaler, we need to point them directly at the FQDN of each delivery controller. Because we're going to be using SSL for our STAs, HTTPS, we've got to make sure that we specify both our delivery controller FQDNs in this subject alternative name. So I'm just going to do that now. So that's going to be lon-ctx-ddc01.c4rmo.com, carmo.com. I'm just going to copy that, and then we'll click on add. And then I'm going to repeat the process, but this time I'm going to change that to DDC02. And then I'm going to click on apply. And then I'm going to add that across. So you can see our main common name is going to be our load balancing VIP, which we'll use to load balance our delivery controllers on the Netscaler. We've then got each individual delivery controller, so DDC01, DDC02, as well as our XML VIP as well. So we'll click apply on that. We're going to go into private key. We're just going to make sure the private key is exportable because we're going to need to install this certificate on our delivery controllers, our other delivery controller once we build it. So we'll click OK, and then we'll click on enroll, and then we'll click on finish. Now if we go to certificates, we can see here we've got a new certificate which is issued to Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com. What we need to do now, we need to bind this certificate to the broker service. So to do that, we've got to get the hash of the certificate as well as the broker service ID. So I'll show you a couple of commandlets to do that. So what we want to do, we want to open Windows PowerShell. I'm just going to open a new PowerShell script. I'm just going to clear this off the screen. So the first command that we need to do is we need to do a dir, and then we need to go into cert, and then if we go into local machine, and then if we go into my, what this is doing is just looking at the personal cert store on the local machine, and then because we've got that certificate that we installed previously, the Citrix XML vip.carmo.com cert, this is going to give us the thumbprint of the certificate. So this is the thumbprint that we need to take a note of. So I'm just going to jot that down, and we'll stick that into Notepad. Just going to dump it in here for now. And then what we need to do now is we need to run a get WMI object command. So if we go back to PowerShell, get WMI object, and then the class is win32 underscore product, and then we're going to pipe that out where name equals, and then we'll put it in brackets, the Citrix broker service, press enter, and what we should have here, we should have a GUID, this identifying number, which is the broker app ID. So again, I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to jot that down into Notepad. We'll do a Control V there. So what we need to do now is we need to use NetSH. Because we haven't actually got IIS installed on this delivery controller, we can't actually just go into IIS bindings and bind this cert. So part of the reason why we had to get these two commands, the thumbprint and the app ID, is because we need to use NetSH. So what we need to do is we'll go into NetSH. So we'll go into NetSH. If we do HTTP and then show SSL cert, you can see there's no certificate bindings. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bind this certificate that we've just created, and we've got the thumbprint of the certificate as well as the app ID of the broker service. So let's do that now. So if we do HTTP and then add and then SSL cert, the IP port is going to be the IP address of the server, which, let me just get it from PowerShell, which is this. I'm just going to paste that. Go back to NetSH. So NetSH HTTP add SSL cert IP port 192.168.3.136. We'll put colon to 443, and then the cert hash equals is going to be basically the cert hash, our thumbprint of our SSL cert. So if we go back into Notepad, this is our thumbprint. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in there, and then app ID equals, the app ID is going to be the GUID of our Citrix broker service. So this one here, click on copy, and then we're going to paste that in there. And I'm just going to confirm the command just to make sure it looks right. NetSH HTTP add SSL cert IP port equals 192.168.3.136:443 cert hash equals app ID equals. Press enter on that, and then you can see the SSL certificate has been successfully added. If we now do HTTP and then show SSL cert, sorry, and then press enter again, you can see now we've got our certificate bound to 443. We've got our cert hash, which is our thumbprint of our certificate, which matches up if we go into the MMC console, and then if we go to details and then look for thumbprint, so it ends with B6E5. If we have a look here, you can see this thumbprint matches up. B6, E5, starts with E3 and then C7. So that's our certificate hash. The app ID hash is our Citrix broker service. So this delivery controller is now done. What we need to do now is we need to install our delivery controller role on our second delivery controller. And then once the installation's finished, what I'll do is I'll restart the video, and then we'll add that second delivery controller to our site. Once that delivery controller is added to our site, we'll then export our PFX file for our Citrix XML VIP, and then we'll install that certificate on our second delivery controller. We'll bind it using NetSH just like we've done here, and then we'll jump onto our Netscaler and we'll create the servers for our delivery controllers. We'll create a load balancing service group, and then we'll create a load balancing virtual server. We'll create a dedicated delivery controller monitor. We'll bind it all together, get the certificate installed on the Netscaler, and then we've successfully got our certificates installed on our delivery controllers. And then when we install Storefront, we can then point our Storefront under the delivery controller section at that load balancing address. We'll also create an A record as well. So I'm just going to pause the video and then I'll resume the video once our second delivery controller has been installed and we're at the stage where we're about to join it to the site. Okay, thank you. So our delivery controller installation on our second delivery controller has now finished. So we're now at the stage where we're going to open Studio and we're going to join this delivery controller to our existing site. Permissions are the same as we required before, so make sure those SQL permissions are still in place that I mentioned earlier. So we've still got our sysadmin permissions. So once Studio opens, we get the option here at the bottom to connect this delivery controller to an existing site. So we're going to click on that. And then we need to type in the FQDN of our first delivery controller. So that will be lon-ctx-ddc01. We'll click on OK. We want Studio to update the database automatically. So what this will do is it will create a SQL login for this delivery controller within our SQL instance. So we'll click yes on that. So it's now just in the process of adding this controller to our site. It'll just take a few seconds, few minutes for this to go through. If it takes a little while longer, what I'll do is I'll give it a few more seconds, and then if it's going to take longer, what I'll do is I'll pause the video and resume. There we go. It's finished now. And there we go. So if we now go down to our controllers node, you can see the lon xd site. We've now got two delivery controllers, lon ctx ddc01, lon ctx ddc02. If we go into PowerShell, what we can do is if we do get-broker controller, this will list the list of our delivery controllers. What we're looking for here is the state. So this is lon ctx ddc01, so active. And then lon ctx ddc02, again that's also active. So if we jump over onto our SQL server, what we should see is we should see a new SQL login for our second delivery controller. So if we just refresh the SQL logins, you can see it's created a new SQL login there for our second delivery controller, and then the permissions are the same as we seen earlier with DDC01. So you can see the user mapping, it's mapped to the 3 databases, and then the database roles for all the different FMA services. So you can see there the config login schema role is associated with the Citrix login, the monitor data underscore role and publics associated with the monitoring database, and then here's all our FMA services, all the database roles that got set up. You can see that's associated with our site database. So everything's done, permissions are good. What we need to do now is we need to install our certificate. So the certificate that we installed onto our first delivery controller, we need to export that out as a PFX with the private key, and then we'll install that certificate then on our second delivery controller. We'll set up the IS bindings. Because we haven't got IS, we've obviously got to do that through NetSH, so using the same commands we used earlier. And then once we've done that, we'll then set up our Netscaler. We'll create a load balancing virtual server for our DDCs. So let's proceed with that. So what I'm going to do is on my DDC01, I'm just going to go to the certificate snapping, the MMC snapping, and then with the Citrix XML VIP certificate selected, I'm going to go all tasks and I'm going to choose export. We'll click on next. We'll export the private key. We're going to be using PKCS12, so PFX format. Include all certificates in the certification path if possible. We'll click next. We'll enter a password, so I'm just going to enter 123 just as a quick. And then for the file name, what we're going to do, we're just going to save it, and then we'll call it Citrix XML VIP.pfx. So I'll save that, click next, click finish. The export was successful, and now what we need to do is we need to copy this PFX file to our second delivery controller. So I'm just going to close out Citrix Studio, paste that over here, and then we need to import the certificate. So the easiest way to do that is if we go to MMC, okay, we'll click on File, Add Remove Snapping, we'll click on Certificates, click on Add, click on Computer Account, click on Next, click on Finish, click on OK, and then if we go to our personal store, what we'll do is we'll do all tasks and then import. We'll choose Next, Browse, we'll choose our PFX file on our desktop. Okay, we'll set that to PFX, so Citrix XML VIP. Next on that, it will ask us for the import, so we'll enter our password. We'll mark the key as exportable just in case if we need to transport the certificate and export it out with a private key. So we'll click next on that, and now the import was successful. So if we go to certificates, you can now see we've got our Citrix XML VIP certificate here now installed on our second delivery controller. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to copy, because it's the same certificate, the certificate hash should be the same. So we'll just double check that. I'm pretty certain it will because it's exactly the same certificate. So if we go down to thumbprint, you can see it ends with B6E5, and then if we open the notepad from earlier, B6E5. So we're gonna copy these over. So the app ID, what we'll do, we'll just confirm the app ID. So what we'll do, we'll run that command. So we'll do get-wmi object, and then the class is win32 underscore product, and then we'll pipe that out where name equals Citrix broker service. So we're just running this command on our second delivery controller just to confirm the app ID. So that's the app ID that we need. So I'm just going to take a copy of that, paste that, and then if we just confirm if it's the same, So looking at the app ID here, and then if we go back to our DDC02, you can see the app ID is the same. It matches. E46 begins with E61, E61, E46. So we've now got the app ID. We've got the thumbprint. The thumbprint of the certificate is the same. So what we need to do now is we need to open NetSH. So I'm going to go into CMD, and then we're going to go NetSH, and then we're going to do HTTP add SSL cert, the IP port equals, and then we're going to get the IP address. So this is our IP address that we need. So I'm just going to take a copy of that, and then we'll paste that there, :443, and then the hash equals this. So this is our thumbprint, so we'll copy that, paste that into there, and then we'll do app ID equals, and then we'll paste our app ID for our broker service. We'll paste that into there as well, and then we'll press enter. Okay, what's that? That's not worked. Hash. Okay, why didn't that like that? Cert hash. Okay, I've put a typo in it. So if we go all the way back, it's actually cert hash. There we go. So that's added. So if we now do NetSH, HTTP, and then if we do show SSL cert, you can see now we've got our SSL cert bound. There's our certificate hash. There's our app ID. And now that matches exactly what's on our first delivery controller. So if we bring that up and then do the same thing, so if we go NetSH, HTTP, show SSL cert, the only thing that's different is obviously the IP address. The hash is the same because obviously we're using the same cert. The app ID is the same because it's the Citrix broker service for that edition of Zen Desktop. So that's done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to now basically set up our Netscaler so we can load balance our delivery controllers. So I'm just going to log on to my Netscalers here. So if we go to 192.168.1.10, which is our NS IP, I'm just going to log in with my NS root account. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a load balancing service group for our delivery controllers, and then what we'll then do, we'll create a load balancing virtual server, and then we'll install our certificate. We'll set up a dedicated monitor as well. So under service groups, we'll just call this DDC XML _ SG for service group. The protocol's going to be SSL because obviously we've installed the cert, so we'll be communicating with SSL. So I'm going to set this to SSL. We'll click on OK, and now we're going to add both our delivery controllers as our service group members. So we'll do it by IP address. Actually, we'll do it by we'll click some new servers. So we've got DNS working, so we can do it by this. So we'll do lon-ctx-ddc01, and then the FQDN is going to be .carmo.com. Okay, we'll click OK on that. We'll create that. The port's going to be 443. Click on create. Okay, that's one service group member added. What we're going to do now is we're going to add the second. So again, we'll just do it by server based. We'll click on add. We'll do it by domain name. So paste that into there. DDC02 this time. The FQDN is going to be 02.carmo.com. We'll click on create. And then what we'll do is we'll select our second delivery controller. The port's going to be 443. click on create, and then we'll click on close. So we've got our load balancing service group now. So our load balancing service group is called ddcxml_sg for service group. We've added both delivery controllers as server objects and bound them to this service group. They're both showing us up, so DNS is working, it's resolved the correct IP addresses. We're using port 443, and the service group is an SSL service group because we'll be using end-to-end encryption. So that's done. So what we need to do now is we're going to click on done. We're now going to create a load balancing virtual server. So what we'll call this is ddc xml and then _VS for virtual server. The protocol is going to be SSL, and then I'm going to give it an IP address. So I'm just going to check which IP address is free for our VIP. So if we do ping 192.168.3.138. Just want to make sure this IP address is free, not being used. Yep, that IP address is good, so we can use that one. So we'll go back to our Netscaler, we'll paste that in, we'll set the port to 443, we'll click on OK, and now we'll click on under service and service groups. We need to bind our new service group, so we're going to click on here, no load balancing virtual server service group binding. We'll click on to select, and then we'll select our DDC XML service group. We'll click on select, we'll then click on bind. So what we now need to do is we now need, because it's an SSL server, we've got to bind our certificate. So that certificate we created on our delivery controllers for Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com. We need to now bind that certificate on the Netscaler. So I'll show you how to basically install that. So you can see our vServer will be down until we actually do that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to come under security, traffic management, SSL, and then what we'll be doing is, because we've got the certificate in PFX format, we're going to be importing it as PKCS12, which will convert it into a PEM file. So I'm just going to export. We've got the export of that PFX file, so I'm just going to drop this onto a folder within my, stick it into, let's just get a local folder I can stick it into. We'll just stick it into my pictures here, so we'll paste that into there. So we've got our XML VIP there. So if we go back to our Netscaler, we'll do import PKCS12. We'll call it Citrix XML VIP as the file name. The PKCS12 file is local, so I'm just going to browse to that location, and then if we select our PFX file here, and then the import password, this is the password that we use to encrypt the private key. So I'm just going to put the password into there. The encoding format, we'll set that as AES256, and then we'll create a new password. So I'm just going to use the same one, and then we'll click on OK. So what that will do now, that will get that PFX file, and that will import it, and it will convert it into a PEM format. So if we now come under SSL certificates and then server certificates, what we can actually do here now is we can click on install, and we're just going to call this Citrix XML VIP, and then if we choose on the appliance, and then if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, what we should have is we should have our new PEM file which got created, which is here, Citrix XML VIP. So it took our PFX file, it's then converted it into a PEM file. So we'll click on OK on that. The key file name will be the same. So we'll choose, we'll go down here, and then we'll choose that PEM file there. We'll click on open. And then the password that we use to encrypt the private key and protect it is that. Click on install. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's because we've already got the root certificate already installed on our Netscaler from earlier stuff I was doing. So you can see here now we've got Citrix XML VIP. So the common name is citrixxmlvip.carmo.com, and the issuer name is our root CA, which is our enterprise root CA. Days to expire 364. The certificate's valid. So what we need to now do is, if we go into traffic management, load balancing, virtual servers, on our DDC XML_VS, we need to edit that, and then under no server certificate, we now need to bind our Citrix XML VIP certificate. We'll click on select, click on bind, and now this vServer should now show us up. So you can see here we've got a load balancing vServer, and part of that vServer we've got a load balancing service group, and then in that service group we've then got our two delivery controllers as service group members. Everything shows us up, so everything's working. We don't need any persistency. What I am going to change is I'm going to change the load balancing method to round robin, which is the recommended method when you're using delivery controller load balancing. So I've got that set to round robin. Okay, that looks good. Click OK, click on done. There's going to be no persistence. So we've got load balancing as the method, no persistence. So what we need to do now, if we have a look at the monitor which is bound to our service group, it's just going to be using the default TCP monitor or the ping monitor by default. So what we need to do is we need to create a dedicated delivery controller monitor. So I'm going to come into here and I'm going to click on add. So I'm just going to call this DDC -mon. And then under the type, we actually do have a dedicated DDC monitor, which is this one here. So Citrix-XD-DDC. It's an inbuilt monitor that we can use to probe our back-end delivery controllers to make sure they're healthy and responding correctly. So we're going to use that dedicated monitor. So what we need to do here, we need to validate credentials. So what I'm going to do is just going to jump onto my domain controller, and I'm just going to create a new account. So I'm just going to unlock this. And then we'll go into AD users computers and just create a new account which we can use for that monitor. So it will validate the credentials through the XML service as part of the monitor probe. So if we go into AD users computers, I'm just going to, under service accounts here, I'm just going to create a new account. So new user, we'll call it DDC _mon, DDC _mon, and then what we'll do is we'll click next. We don't want the user to change password at next logon. Password never expires, and then we'll enter a password for that account. Okay, click on next, click on finish. So we've now just got a service account that our monitor will use. So if we go back to here, what we'll do is we'll enter this account. So this will be the username which the monitor will use to probe the delivery controller. So we'll do DDC _mon, and then we'll enter the password, and then the domain is carmo.com. I don't think you need to put it in the NetBIOS format. No, that's fine. Because we're using SSL, we've got to make sure secure's ticked, and that's all we need to do. So that's a dedicated DDC monitor, which is a lot better than the standard TCP or the ping monitor. So this will actually check the back-end health of our delivery controllers as part of the monitor probe. So we'll click on select, click on bind, click on done, and now if everything's all working, we should still see our delivery controllers as being up. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to shut one of my delivery controllers down just to see if the monitor probe detects that and then marks that DDC as down. So I'm just going to shut down my new delivery controller, DDC2. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just stop the broker service rather than shutting it down. I'll just stop the broker service. So if we bring up services on DDC2, and then if we find the Citrix broker service, so this one here, we'll just click on stop. So if we were using the ping monitor or just a TCP probe, if the Citrix broker service was stopped or there was an issue with the delivery controller, that server would still be marked as up, because obviously the TCP, the SYN, the ACK and the FIN is still working and the server's still physically powered on and pinging. So with this dedicated monitor, we should now start to see, yep, so you can see here the effective state, it's partially up. So if we have a look now at the manage members, you can see my lon-ctx DDC02 is down because I've stopped the broker service. So we know now that our delivery controller monitor's fully working, which is good, and that's done. So there's one last thing to do, and what we need to do now is, obviously we've got this IP address here for our DDC XML virtual server. We need to create a DNSA record. So our DNSA record will be Citrix XML VIP, and it will resolve to this IP address here, the .138. So to do that, we'll just jump onto my domain controller and go into our DNS console. So to do that, we open Admin Tools, we click on DNS, we expand our forward lookup zone, and then we expand our carmo.com zone. So within our carmo.com zone, we need to create a new A record. So if we click on new host A record, the A record will be Citrix XML VIP, and then it will be at carmo.com. The IP address will be 192.168.3.138. So if we jump onto our Netscaler and have a look at our virtual server for our DDC XML traffic, you can see here it's 192.168.3.138. So our DNSA record is pointing at that VIP. So you can see anytime we type in Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com, it will resolve to that load balancing VIP, and then the Netscaler will load balance the request to either one of the delivery controllers, which are the load balancing service group members. Depending, it will do that on the round robin format because that's the method we're set. So that's it done. So that's all we need to do. So when we install Storefront in the next video, when we create our store and we add our delivery controllers, rather than adding each individual delivery controller, so lon CTX DDC01 and lon CTX DDC02, what we will simply do is we'll just add a single delivery controller and then point it at Citrix XML VIP.carmo.com, and then the Netscaler will load balance the request to one of our delivery controllers. So we've successfully load balanced our delivery controllers. We've gone through the setup of our site. We've created our first delivery controller, set up our virtual apps and desktop site. We've added a second delivery controller for redundancy. We've installed certificates on both of our delivery controllers, and we've set up load balancing for our delivery controllers for the XML service. So that concludes this video. In the next video, we'll be installing Citrix Director and configuring Citrix Director, as well as setting up and configuring our Storefront server group. We'll also be load balancing both of those solutions as well. So thanks for watching. Tune into the next video.